Hey guys, what's up? Evan from Stock Music Musician, and in this video I want to show you my hip-hop mastering chain. This is what I've been using a lot lately. It doesn't really change that much depending on the genre, to be honest, whether it's hip-hop or anything. It's more, that's going to affect maybe more the settings that I choose, but nonetheless, more than the settings, I think it's the order of plugins that you have and your philosophy towards using them. And so in this video, I'm going to show you kind of how that works, how I set up my chain. I'm going to recommend some plugins that I love. You do not need to use these at all, but if you want them, there are going to be links down below. Some are affiliate links, some are not. These are just the plugins that I use and that I enjoy. And a note on that, do not buy the UAD plugins unless you have a UAD audio interface, because they will not run without one. So let's look at this to begin with. I want to talk first about everything I have and the order I have them in, and then we'll take kind of a listen. Actually, we'll listen to the song unprocessed first, aside from the fact that I do have my maximizers still on, so we can kind of have a comparable volume. Otherwise, if I turn the maximizers off, it's just going to be really quiet. So this is what it sounds like with only what would be considered the standard mastering. I have a couple maximizers on. Now let's turn everything on. So you should instantly hear there's just way more vibe, way more low end, way more balance. It's way wider, stereo-wise, I think, and also what you'll hear, or what you would see if you were to look at it, is that it is louder, even though I'm not using the maximizer, because of the way I've got the compressor set up, the clipper, just a lot of little micro moves that all add up to make a huge impact. Before we go farther though, if you are at all confused about mastering, I do have a free mastering workshop. It's like over an hour long. It's maybe like an hour and a half free workshop. You can click on the link down below to watch it right now, and it will teach you everything you need to know about using these things. The first thing I want to talk about actually is not what's in my mastering chain, but what's at the end of it, and which are things that you don't end up hearing at the end of the day, but are critically important to mastering. First, I've got this free plugin, the MV Meter 2. This I just used to gain stage the entire mastering process. Gain staging essentially means that, especially for these analog emulating plugins, they expect to receive a frequency or a level going into them of about -18 dBFS, which is what I've got it set to here. And so these meters should be going at 0 most of the time so that they will sound optimal. They do their warmth, their saturation, all of that right around that 0 mark. And then you have to be sure that you don't add additional volume in the next plugin, right? So if you do an EQ boost, that really raises the level of everything. So then you have to use the output control of your EQ to turn it back down a few dB to compensate for that boost. Similarly, maybe if you add some compression, you're actually reducing the volume of everything. So you might need to use makeup gain to recover from that, so that you're always hitting at 0 and passing along a good signal to the subsequent plugin. And so that's why I've got this open. I'll keep it open the entire time as I tweak to make sure that the signal is great on each stage of the process. That is the number one most important thing. The next tool I have on is something called Tonal Balance Control, and this is part of Isotope Ozone. And what this will do is give you this frequency spectrum of, they've used AI to run bajillions of tracks through the algorithm to see how it measures up in terms of where the frequencies are, and also the crest factor, which is basically how compressed or how dynamic it is. Is it spiky and all over the place, or is it squashed? And so you can get really fine details with it. What I like about it is I don't have the greatest room, and I don't have, I've got a fair amount of soundproofing, but I don't have nearly enough. So this helps me kind of get closer, especially on this low end section here, so I don't have to guess where I'm mixing. So let's just check out what this does. My track is the white track, and the blue is the range I'm shooting for. You can solo any section. So it's great, and my crest factor is right in the middle there where I want it to be. You'll notice that this VU meter is spiking to hell, and that's because I have the maximizers on. So I would be doing all this measuring while the maximizers were in bypass mode. Right. And then it's only once at the end I add the maximizers. It's only when I add the maximizers at the end that this doesn't give me useful information. But so that you can hear this clearly on your end, I'm leaving the maximizers on. Normally I don't. Normally I add everything in sequence. Finally, I've also got this plugin called SoundID Reference, which basically listens to your room and tries to tweak, remind me later, kind of corrects the sound that your speakers actually produce in your real room to give you a more accurate stereo sound so that you can more clearly and cleanly hear what you're actually mixing. It works really well, but still I like tonal balance control to just help out as well. But now that we're in the last stages of the mixing or the mastering process, I turn all these off because they are at the end of my signal chain and they will mess up with the maximizer, and then you'll see this, the output clipping and things like that. So let's look at what's actually going on in the mastering chain. But let me tell you, those things that I just talked to you about are as important as the mastering chain, because you can't use your mastering chain properly if you're not gain staging and if you don't have any idea what you're trying to mix towards. Reference tracks I also use, and I listen to those and compare as well, but that's not really built into my mastering chain. So the first thing I have is just sort of like a analog channel strip plugin emulation. I'm not using any of the EQ on it. I'm just trying to get a little more harmonic saturation and warmth. So we'll turn everything on and off once when we do it. We'll do bypassed and then on, bypassed and then on. And just that harmonic saturation just makes everything hit a little bit harder, especially the snare, but it's not making it louder because I've gain staged it. And that's a big thing we need to be concerned about when we're mastering or mixing, is that we're not actually making things better, we're just making them louder. And so because I've gain staged, I know I did not make it louder. It just sounds a little bit better with a little more saturation. There's a lot of great tube emulation or console emulation preamps out there. I really like anything by UAD and anything by Softtube I'd recommend. Next up, we've got a soft clipper, standard clip. What this is doing is it is just cutting off the smallest peaks. It is not a compressor. I don't have time to go into the difference between compression and limiting in this video, but basically it's more or less transparently cutting off the highest peaks where like the kick, the bass, and a piano stabs all at the same time to make it so that I can raise the overall output by a couple dB transparently. So we'll turn this on and off and we'll just see what's going on here. That's the cut there. So what this is doing is, this one should make it sound a little bit louder because I did reduce it by a dB, so I've had to make up for it a little bit. But basically what you look at here is these are the original measurements and the after measurements. So let's just play it. When you notice when I bypassed it, it was really, there was not that much of a difference. It was pretty transparent, but the max peak before was -8. That means 0 being the loudest you want it to be, being clipping. So you don't even want it at 0 or near it. And now the peak is at -11.65. That's 3 dB quieter, but the average volume is still the same, more or less, which means that down the road, when I get to the final stages of this, I get to raise it by 3 dB because I've purchased that much headroom totally transparently. And it means that my compressors are also not going to have to work nearly as hard. So clip it. And if I'm trying to do a more aggressive hip hop track, even something really like loud and punchy, I might add another standard clip after this and do another couple of dB so that they're both kind of working gently. A big trick to mastering and with your mastering chain is to do small moves repeatedly in a sequence, not to try and do everything all at once. Again, if this is all overwhelming, I've got that free workshop, which is in much more depth. Okay, next up I've got a tape simulation, which is going to add a ton of low end boost, a little bit of glue, a little bit of saturation. Let's listen. Off. So to me, the tight end, the top end feels tighter without being harsher, and the low end just thumps a little bit lower. If you don't have big enough speakers, though, you might not hear it. Next up, I'm using Ozone, basically just some subtractive EQ, taking out some of the low frequencies that we don't need, a little top boost, a little mid boost, and a dynamic EQ to take out some of the most resonant frequencies. So let's listen. On right now. And that's just cleaning things up a little bit, making more headroom and taking away some of the sounds that we don't really need. Now we're going to get into a pair of compressors that are both going to just gently be adding some glue. We've got the UAD, the classic SSL bus comp. This is great. The one by Waves is also fantastic. So I recommend both. This is just the one I'm using. So we'll try it on and off. We got a no bypass. So we'll off first and then we'll put it in. And to me, this is gluing everything together. It's pushing kind of the sound forward and in, which is kind of what I'm going for, sort of this lo-fi sound. But you could have a slower release, you could have more compression, you could have less compression. For me, this is kind of giving me that, like, that thing that makes us feel more like it's like this sampled old school sound. But plenty of times I'll use it more for less glue. But here, let's just listen to it in and out one more time, and you'll kind of listen for that. Nothing really feels like it's working together as much. And then it just feels like it's more like musicians in the room kind of all reacting to each other. Next, we've got another compressor here, the PuigChild Emulation by UAD. And this one is doing similarly, just a touch of compression, but this is doing mid-side compression. So it's compressing the mid and the sides separately to create a little more stereo width and allow for a little more consistent dynamic range on both ends. It's an advanced technique, but I like to do it just a touch. So we'll start with it off, put it on. Listen to the stereo. especially on that piano, it creates a little more detail on the sides, which makes the whole thing sound wider. And we're not giving up much in the middle. It's just kind of giving it a little grit, a little extra stuff. I've got the universal audio version of the Chandler Limited Curve Bender. The soft tube one is great too. Soft tube, I guess, I don't even know. This should be, I don't know if this is the soft tube or I guess it's the universal audio one. I don't know. That's both by soft tube, really. It's just who's licensed it. And here, I'm just trying to do some subtle, like, enhancement in mid-side mode, again, trying to bring out a little bit of the highs on the sides and a little bit of the body down low. I've also done some high passing on the low or on the side so that there's a little more low end. I could bring this up, but no need there. And I've taken off just a little bit of the high in the middle. So let's listen what's going on here. So we'll start with it off and then we'll put it on. Vibe to it. I feel like there's just a little more warmth in it, and it feels like, again, there's just a little more details, like kind of not on the far sides, but like right here, if you've got a decent room to hear it. And then also, I feel like the low end is just a little bit tighter thanks to this low cut here on the side. So that's the next thing. You know, you could, for mid-side processing, really, you can do all of this in Ozone, or if you've got the Fab Filter plugins, that sort of thing works great. Next, we've got the Pultec emulation. Again, this is going to be here to help us for some low end and to also get us some, just control the high end a little bit, a little shine, and then a little more tube warmth. And all this tube warmth adds up. So we'll start with it off. We're doing the low end boost trick here. And we're cutting a little bit at the high end just to make this a little more lo-fi, boosting in the mid-range for a little more detail. And you'll notice we've had to take the gain down a lot on this plugin. Maybe meaning I've used it too much, but we'll see. Off. Just feels like it's hitting harder, because it is, and the low end or the high end, it just feels, again, a little more detailed because we've boosted it in the frequencies that like we're used to hearing, but then we've rolled off a little bit of the top so that it sounds a little more lo-fi, which is the vibe we're going for in this song. It would not at all be appropriate in many other songs, but that's the hip-hop mastering chain, right? Because sometimes it's a more lo-fi thing and sometimes it's a more hi-fi thing. Next up, I've got Ozone, and we're using Ozone here really for some more dynamic EQ. We're using the imager to create a little more stereo space, and we're using a maximizer to turn up the volume quite a bit. So I'm not going to turn this on and off because of the maximizer issue, but I will turn on the imager on and off. So we'll start with it off. And so you'll hear that just, especially on the like reverb, it just adds a little more depth to what's going on there. You can lower the middle so that it's more focused if you've got subs or whatever. And I've got a very fast attack on this maximizer because I'm trying to just clean it up and grab it really fast. And I've got a second maximizer, which is slower, and it's sort of just doing the last grab. So you'll notice, I mean, we're already bringing it up to kind of 1, but we're not really doing more than 1 dB or 2 of gain reduction. 2.5 at the most, 3.5. We can probably pull this down a little bit. Yeah. And then finally we've got the Weiss here, which is just another great maximizer. This is from Softtube, definitely. And this is like not going that extreme. We're just doing a very little bit to get just a little more tightness because it's hip hop and we want it to hit hard. So let's look. And there you have it. That's my hip hop mastering chain these days. Let's go over it once more. We're gain staging and we're learning how to monitor. We're using the solid gain just to get the the gain down at the very beginning. We're going through a analog preamp modeler to get some saturation and warmth. We're clipping the smallest peaks. We're running some tape into it to get some warmth, some compression, and some saturation and some stereo imaging. We're then EQing out some unnecessary frequencies using dynamic EQ and regular EQ. We're using some glue compression. We're using some mid-side compression to bring out more detail on the sides. We're using some mid-side EQ to again bring out more detail on the sides and focus the middle. We're using some just overall tube EQ to warm things up and to kind of bring out the low end. And then we're using a little more subtractive EQ, which may or may not be necessary. Stereo imaging, Maximizer 1 and Maximizer 2, both of which shouldn't be doing very much work. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to know more, please do watch that workshop. It gets into a lot more detail than this. All right, have a great one. Thanks and bye.